I shared my last groceries with a stranger. Hours later, everything changed. The stranger asked me for food, and I almost said no. Not because I didn't want to help, but because I had no idea how I was going to feed my own family in the days ahead. At that moment, my husband and I were barely holding our lives together. The bills kept piling up, our savings were gone, we were behind on rent, and nearly every conversation between us ended in another argument about money. The last thing I expected that day was for a simple act of kindness to change everything. But that's exactly what happened. My name is Vanessa Morales. I'm 35 years old, and I live about 50 minutes outside Miami with my husband Luis and our 2 children, Mateo and Sofia. If you had met us a few years ago, you probably would have thought we were doing just fine. We weren't rich, not even close, but we had a decent life. We paid our bills on time. We had a used SUV parked outside our apartment. The kids had birthday parties. We could afford family trips to the beach a few times every summer. Nothing fancy, just a normal life. And honestly, that was all we ever wanted. I worked as a nursing assistant at a senior care facility. The job was exhausting, but I loved taking care of people. Luis worked as a maintenance supervisor for a property management company. The pay wasn't amazing, but together we made enough. At least we used to. Everything changed on a Thursday afternoon. I remember the day clearly because Luis came home much earlier than usual. The second he walked through the door, I knew something was wrong. He wasn't carrying his lunchbox. His shoulders were slumped, and he wouldn't look me in the eye. "What's wrong?" I asked. For a moment he just stood there. Then he quietly said 3 words that changed everything. "I lost my job." The company had lost several contracts. Management decided to cut costs. More than 20 employees were laid off that day. Luis was one of them. At first, we weren't too worried. We had some savings. Luis had years of experience. Finding another job couldn't be that hard. Or at least that's what we told ourselves. "We'll be okay," Luis said that night. And I believed him. For a while. Weeks passed. Then months. Interview after interview ended with rejection. Every time the phone rang, we hoped it would be good news. Most of the time, it wasn't. Slowly, our savings account began to shrink, then disappear completely. That's when the real problems started. I picked up extra shifts, then even more shifts. I worked weekends, holidays, double shifts whenever they were available. I left home before sunrise and often came back after dark. The kids noticed. Mateo stopped asking if I could come watch his soccer practice. He already knew the answer. Little Sofia started crying every morning when I left for work. She didn't understand why mommy was always gone, and honestly, that broke my heart more than any unpaid bill ever could. Eventually, Luis found another job, but by then the damage had already been done. The new position paid much less than his previous one, nearly 40% less, and the bills never stopped coming. Electricity, internet, insurance, school expenses, daycare, groceries. Every time we managed to pay one bill, 2 more seemed to appear. It felt like we were running uphill carrying a backpack full of bricks. No matter how hard we worked, we kept falling further behind. Then came the night that still hurts to remember. Mateo walked into the kitchen holding a flyer from school. "Dad," he said, "can I get a PlayStation for Christmas this year?" The room immediately went quiet. Luis looked down at his plate. I stared at the sink. Mateo didn't notice. He kept talking. "A lot of my friends already have one." I could hear the hope in his voice, the excitement, the innocence, and I hated what came next, because I already knew the answer. "Not this year, buddy," Luis said softly. Mateo's smile disappeared. "Why not?" Neither of us answered right away. Because how do you explain financial collapse to a 9-year-old child? How do you tell him that his parents are terrified every single day? How do you tell him that you're not sure you'll even be living in the same apartment next month? You don't. So instead, you just say the only thing you can. "We can't afford it right now." And that's exactly what broke his heart. That night, after the kids had gone to bed, Luis and I sat at the kitchen table in silence. Neither of us touched the dishes. Neither of us turned on the television. We just stared at the numbers spread across the table. Bills, statements, past due notices, and a notebook where I had written every expense down to the last dollar. Luis rubbed his forehead. "We'll figure it out." It was the same thing he'd been saying for months. Not because he didn't mean it, because he didn't know what else to say. I looked at the notebook, then at him, then back at the notebook. We've been saying that for almost a year. The words came out sharper than I intended. Luis looked away, and immediately I felt guilty. None of this was his fault, but none of it was mine either. That's the thing financial stress does to people. Eventually you stop fighting the problem. You start fighting each other. The next few weeks were some of the hardest of our marriage. Every conversation seemed to revolve around money. Every decision felt impossible. Should we pay the electric bill now? Or wait another week and pay daycare first? Should we buy cheaper groceries? Should we cancel the internet? Could we survive with one less insurance payment? Every choice felt wrong. Every choice hurt somewhere else. Then things got even worse. One afternoon, our SUV broke down completely. The repair estimate was more than the vehicle was worth. Luis spent 2 days trying to find a solution. There wasn't one. We sold it for a fraction of what we had paid years earlier. I still remember watching the buyer drive away. It felt like watching another piece of our old life disappear. After that, everything became harder. My commute nearly doubled. Instead of driving, I had to take 2 buses to get to work. Some mornings I left home before 5. Some nights I didn't get back until after 8. The exhaustion started living inside my body, like a permanent weight I couldn't put down. One evening, I came home and found Mateo sitting quietly on the couch. His backpack was beside him. He looked upset. "What's wrong?" I asked. He hesitated, then handed me a paper from school. It was a permission slip for a field trip. The cost wasn't huge, but to us, it felt enormous. "Mom," his voice was barely above a whisper. "If we don't have the money, it's okay." That sentence hit me harder than anything else, because children aren't supposed to think like that. Children aren't supposed to worry about family finances. They're supposed to worry about homework and soccer practice and cartoons, not whether their parents can afford a school trip. I hugged him tightly, and after he went to bed, I cried in the bathroom where nobody could hear me. A few days later, another problem arrived. This time it came as a text message. I was on my lunch break when my phone vibrated. I opened the message and instantly felt my stomach drop. It was from our landlord. "Vanessa, I need to talk to you about the overdue rent balance. If payment isn't received by Friday, we'll have to begin the eviction process." I read it once, then again, then a third time. My hands started shaking. Eviction! The word felt unreal, like something that happened to other people. Not us, not our family, not after everything we had worked for. I spent the rest of my shift pretending everything was normal, but inside, I was falling apart. That evening, I showed Luis the message. For several seconds, he didn't speak. Then he sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where we had spent months trying to solve problems we couldn't solve. "What are we going to do?" I asked quietly. Luis stared at the floor. For the first time in our marriage, I saw something I had never seen in his eyes before. Fear. Real fear. The kind that keeps people awake at night. The kind that makes them question everything. That night, neither of us slept much. The next morning, we started calling everyone we could think of. Family, friends, former co-workers, anyone who might be able to help. But everyone was dealing with their own problems. No one had thousands of dollars sitting around. No one could save us. By Thursday afternoon, it felt like our entire world was hanging by a thread. I finished my shift feeling completely drained. Physically, emotionally, mentally. I checked my bank account before leaving work. The balance made my chest tighten. We had just enough money left to buy basic groceries and survive until payday. Nothing more. I remember standing in the parking lot looking at my phone, thinking about rent, thinking about eviction, thinking about my children, thinking about how hard we were trying, and how it still wasn't enough. Then I got on the bus and headed toward the grocery store. I had no idea that within the next hour, I would meet a stranger who would change everything. The bus ride felt longer than usual that afternoon. I sat by the window, holding my purse tightly against my chest. Outside, Miami looked exactly the same as it always did. People laughed on restaurant patios. Luxury cars rolled through traffic. Tourists walked along sunny streets without a care in the world. And somehow that made everything feel worse. It was strange how life could be falling apart for one person while looking perfectly normal for everyone else. By the time I reached the grocery store, I already had a headache. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app one more time. The balance hadn't magically changed. I wasn't sure why I kept checking. Maybe I was hoping for a miracle. Instead, I grabbed a shopping cart and walked inside. I moved slowly through the aisles. Not because I had time, because every item required a decision, every dollar mattered. I picked up a box of cookies, then put it back. Mateo loved those cookies, but they weren't necessary. I reached for a bag of chips, then put those back too. Not necessary. Everything came down to the same question. Do we need this to survive the week? If the answer was no, it stayed on the shelf. By the time I reached the checkout line, my cart looked depressing. Bread, milk, rice, pasta, bananas, a small package of chicken, the cheapest cereal I could find. No treats, no extras, nothing fun, just survival. The cashier scanned each item while I silently calculated the total in my head. When she announced the amount, I felt relief. Barely enough, but enough. I paid, loaded everything into 2 grocery bags, and headed toward the exit. I was only a few steps outside when I heard a voice behind me. "Excuse me, ma'am?" I turned around. A man stood near the entrance. He looked to be in his early 30s. His clothes were worn. His beard was unshaven. His face looked exhausted. But there was something unusual about him. I couldn't explain it. He didn't seem dangerous. He didn't seem aggressive. Just tired. Very tired. "I'm sorry to bother you," he said. His voice was polite, almost embarrassed. "But could you help me get something to eat?" I froze. For a second, neither of us spoke. Normally, I would have apologized and kept walking. Not because I didn't care, because I simply couldn't afford to help anyone. Especially not now. Not today. Not after the landlord's message. Not after the rent notice. Not after everything. "I'm sorry," I finally said. "I really can't." The words hurt more than I expected. The man nodded. No problem. There was no anger in his voice, no guilt trip, no pressure. He simply accepted the answer. Then he quietly added, "I understand." And somehow that made me feel even worse. I watched him start to walk away. Then I looked down at my grocery bags. I thought about Mateo, I thought about Sofia, I thought about Luis, I thought about the rent, the bills, the eviction notice, the fear. Every reason not to help was standing right in front of me. But then another thought appeared. What if this man was telling the truth? What if he really hadn't eaten? What if tonight he had even less than we did? Before I could stop myself, I called out, "Wait!" The man turned around. I opened one of the bags, slowly, reluctantly, because I knew exactly what this would cost us. I pulled out a loaf of bread, a few bananas, and part of the chicken I had just bought, the food I had carefully budgeted for, the food my family needed, the food I honestly couldn't afford to give away. I held it out toward him. "It's not much." The man stared at it, then at me. For a moment he didn't move, almost as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Finally he accepted it. "Thank you." His voice cracked slightly, and suddenly I realized how hungry he really was. Not pretending, not acting, hungry. The kind of hungry that changes the way people look. The kind of hungry that makes pride disappear. "You should eat," I said softly. He nodded. "I will." Then he smiled, a small smile, the first one I'd seen, and walked away. I stood there for several seconds watching him disappear into the crowd. Part of me felt good, but another part felt terrible, because now my grocery bags were lighter, and my problems were still waiting for me. I headed toward the bus stop. The sun was beginning to set. The benches were nearly empty. I sat down and placed the bags beside me. For the first time all day, there was nothing to distract me. No patients, no work, no shopping cart, no tasks, just me and my thoughts. And suddenly everything hit me at once. The overdue rent, the fear of losing our apartment, the disappointment in Mateo's eyes, the exhaustion on Luis's face, the constant pressure, the feeling that no matter how hard we fought, life kept pushing us backward. I lowered my head, and before I knew it, tears were rolling down my cheeks. I quickly wiped them away, but it didn't help. More followed. I wasn't crying because of one bad day. I was crying because of an entire year. A year of fear, a year of sacrifice, a year of pretending everything would be okay. That's when I heard a familiar voice. "Are you all right?" I looked up, and there he was, the same man, standing a few feet away. I quickly wiped my eyes and forced a small smile. "I'm fine," I said. The man looked at me for a moment, then glanced at the tears I clearly hadn't managed to hide. "No," he said gently. "I don't think you are." For some reason, those words hit harder than they should have. Maybe because nobody had asked me that question in a long time. Not really. People asked how I was doing all the time. Co-workers, patients, neighbors, friends. But most of them didn't actually want the answer. They wanted the polite version, the easy version, the version where everything was okay. This stranger was the first person in months who seemed to genuinely care. I laughed softly and shook my head. "It's been a rough year." He nodded, as if he understood. Then he sat down on the far end of the bench, far enough away to be respectful, close enough to talk. For a few moments, neither of us said anything. Cars passed by. People walked along the sidewalk. The evening traffic slowly built around us. Then he spoke again. "You know," he said, looking out at the road, "sometimes people carry things that are much heavier than groceries." I smiled despite myself. It was such a simple observation, but it felt true, very true. I looked down at my hands. Then, before I could stop myself, I started talking. At first, it was just a little, a few details, then more, and more. It all came pouring out. The job loss, the savings disappearing, the constant bills, the rent notice, the fear of losing our apartment, the long work shifts, the endless stress, the arguments with Luis, the guilt I felt every time I couldn't give my children what they deserved. I even told him about Mateo wanting a PlayStation. The words I'd been holding inside for months finally had somewhere to go. And the stranger listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't offer advice. He didn't tell me everything would be okay. He simply listened. When I finally stopped talking, I realized nearly 15 minutes had passed. The sun was lower now. The sky was turning orange. And somehow I felt lighter. Not because my problems had disappeared, because I wasn't carrying them alone for a few minutes. The stranger sat quietly. Then he asked, "Can I tell you something?" "Sure," he smiled. "When you gave me that food, you had no reason to?" I shrugged. "You were hungry." "So are you." I looked at him confused. He continued, "Maybe not in the same way, but you're hungry too." "Hungry for what?" He thought for a second. "Hope." The word landed somewhere deep inside me, because he was right. I hadn't felt hopeful in a very long time. Not really. I was surviving, working, paying bills, worrying. But hoping, no, not anymore. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. Then the stranger suddenly stood up. "I'd like to thank you." I laughed. "You already did." He shook his head. "No, I mean properly." "Seriously, it's okay." "No," he said. "Please." I frowned. The whole situation was beginning to feel strange. "What do you mean?" He reached into his pocket, then looked at me. "Will you trust me for 30 seconds? I stared at him. Honestly, every warning bell in my head started ringing. I barely knew this man. I didn't even know his name. And now he was asking me to trust him? "What exactly are you planning?" He laughed. "A surprise." That answer did not help at all. I crossed my arms. I don't usually accept surprises from strangers. "Fair enough." He smiled again, then held up his hands. "I promise I'm not trying to sell you anything." I laughed despite myself. "Good. I'm serious." "I know." For the first time all day, I felt myself relax a little. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled something out. A set of keys. I stared at them, confused. "What are those?" "Part of the surprise." Now I was even more confused. The stranger took a step closer. Not too close, just enough to place the keys in front of me. Then he said something I'll never forget. "Close your eyes." I blinked. "What?" Just for a moment. I laughed nervously. "No." "Why not?" "Because that's exactly how people end up on the evening news." He burst out laughing. A real laugh, the kind that made other people nearby turn and look. For some reason, that made me trust him a little more. A very little. Still, I hesitated. Part of me thought this had to be some kind of prank. Maybe someone was recording a social experiment. I'd seen videos like that online. People helping strangers, giving away money, filming reactions. Maybe this was one of those. If it was, maybe he'd hand me $20 or 50, maybe a grocery gift card. That alone would have helped. I certainly wasn't expecting anything more. Finally, I sighed. "Fine." He smiled. "Close your eyes." Slowly I did. Then he gently placed something into my hands. Cold metal. Keys. Definitely keys. But keys to what? For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then I heard his voice. "Okay. You can open your eyes now." Slowly I opened my eyes. The keys were still resting in my hands. I stared at them, then at the stranger, then back at the keys. For a few seconds, I honestly thought I was missing something. "What exactly am I looking at?" I asked. The stranger smiled. "A set of keys." "Very funny." "I'm serious." I shook my head. "Keys to what?" Instead of answering, he pointed across the parking lot. "Come with me." Immediately my suspicion returned. "What is this?" "Just trust me." "I don't even know your name." He laughed. "Fair point." Then he extended his hand. "My name is Adrian." I hesitated for a moment before shaking it. "Vanessa. It's nice to officially meet you, Vanessa." Then he pointed toward the parking lot again. "Come on." I looked around. The bus hadn't arrived yet. Part of me wanted to leave. Another part desperately wanted to know what was happening. Curiosity won. I picked up my grocery bags and followed him. We walked between rows of parked cars. One row, then another, then another. Eventually I stopped. "Adrian." He turned. "What?" "If you're leading me to a white van, I'm leaving." He laughed so hard he nearly doubled over. For the first time all day, I found myself laughing too. Then he pointed ahead. "There." I followed his finger. A silver SUV sat near the far edge of the parking lot. It looked clean, well maintained, certainly nicer than anything my family could currently afford. I looked at Adrian, then at the vehicle, then back at Adrian. Okay? Press the button. What button? The unlock button. I stared at him. My brain still hadn't caught up. Then I looked down at the keys. My thumb slowly moved toward the button. I pressed it. The SUV's lights flashed. The mirrors unfolded, and the doors unlocked. For a moment, the entire world seemed to stop. My heart started pounding. No. The word escaped before I could stop it. Adrian smiled. Yes. No. I pressed the button again. The lights flashed once more. The vehicle responded to my key. My key. I looked at Adrian as if he had lost his mind. What is this? It's yours. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was impossible. No, seriously. I'm serious. No, you're not. I am. I felt dizzy, completely overwhelmed. Nothing about this made sense. People didn't just give away vehicles. Not to strangers. Not in real life. Not outside grocery stores. Why? I whispered. Adrian took a slow breath. Then he looked toward the SUV. A long time ago, my family went through something difficult. I listened. We lost almost everything. His voice remained calm. There were days when my mother skipped meals so my sister and I could eat. The smile disappeared from his face. I remember watching her pretend she wasn't hungry. Immediately, I thought about all the evenings I'd done exactly that, telling Mateo and Sofia I'd already eaten, when the truth was I was simply making sure there was enough food left for them. Adrian continued. One day, a stranger helped us. I didn't say anything. There was no camera, no social media, no reward. They simply helped because they could. He looked directly at me. I never forgot that. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he smiled. And today, when you gave away food you clearly couldn't afford to lose. His eyes dropped toward my grocery bags. I recognized something. I felt tears beginning to form again. Adrian. You reminded me of her. I covered my mouth, trying desperately not to cry, failing completely. The next thing I knew, tears were streaming down my face. Not quiet tears, not polite tears, the kind that come from months of pressure finally breaking open. I started crying right there in the parking lot, and before I knew it, Adrian wrapped me in a brief hug, the kind of hug people give when they know words aren't enough. When I finally pulled myself together, I looked at the SUV again. Then something caught my attention. Through the rear window, I could see something sitting on the back seat. Several things, actually. Colorful things. I frowned. What are those? Adrian smiled. Go look. I slowly opened the rear passenger door and immediately froze. Toys. A stuffed bear. An art set. A soccer ball. Several children's books. For a second, I couldn't breathe. Mateo loved soccer. Sofia carried stuffed animals everywhere. It felt as though someone had somehow looked inside our lives. Then I noticed a small box sitting beside the toys. Simple, brown, ordinary. I turned toward Adrian. What's in there? He smiled again. Open it. My hands were trembling now, partly from excitement, partly from disbelief, partly because I was terrified this was all a dream I would wake up from at any second. Slowly, I lifted the lid, and what I saw inside made my knees nearly give out beneath me. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the box. Slowly, I lifted the lid the rest of the way, then I froze. For a moment, my brain simply stopped working. Inside the box was money, stacks of cash, neatly bundled together. Far more money than I had expected. Far more than made any sense. I blinked. Once. Twice. 3 times. Certain my eyes were playing tricks on me. They weren't. The money was still there. Holy crap! The words slipped out before I could stop them. I immediately covered my mouth, then looked at Adrian, then back at the box, then at Adrian again. What the hell is this? My voice cracked halfway through the sentence. Adrian smiled softly. It's yours. I stared at him. No. It's yours? No. I shook my head so hard my hair fell into my face. No, absolutely not. He laughed. Vanessa, I'm serious. I pushed the box toward him. I can't take this. Why not? Because normal people don't do this. That made him laugh even harder. I wasn't trying to be funny. I genuinely couldn't understand what was happening. Just a few hours earlier, I had been calculating whether I could afford bananas. Now I was standing in a parking lot, looking at more money than I'd seen in one place in years. It felt unreal, like some kind of dream, or a prank, or a nervous breakdown. Honestly, I wasn't sure which. My eyes filled with tears again. Adrian! I looked at the cash, then at the SUV, then at the toys, then back at him. Why me? The question came out as a whisper. Of all the people in Miami, of all the people walking in and out of that grocery store, why me? Adrian was quiet for a moment. Then he reached into the box and pulled out a folded envelope. I think this explains it better than I can. He handed it to me. I slowly opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter. The handwriting was simple, careful, almost old-fashioned. I began reading. Years ago, my family lost everything. My father got sick. Medical bills piled up. We lost our home. My mother worked herself to exhaustion trying to keep us afloat. Most people looked away. Most people pretended not to see us. Then one day, a complete stranger helped us. Not because they expected something in return, not because anyone was watching. They simply saw people who were struggling and chose kindness. That moment changed my life. I promised myself that if I ever had the chance, I would do the same for someone else. Today, you reminded me of my mother. You gave away food that your own family needed, not because you had plenty, because you cared. People like you are rare. Please accept this gift, and when life gives you the opportunity someday, pass that kindness forward. By the time I reached the end of the letter, I could barely see the words through my tears. I lowered the paper. My entire body was trembling. Not because of the money, not because of the SUV, because for the first time in a very long time, I felt seen. Someone had noticed. Someone had understood. Someone had looked at all the pain my family had been carrying and said, I see you. I started crying again, harder than before. Months of fear, months of stress, months of pretending I was strong. All of it came pouring out. Adrian didn't interrupt. He simply stood there and waited. Eventually I wiped my eyes and laughed through the tears. You realize nobody is ever going to believe this story. He grinned. I know. I looked down at the keys in my hand, then at the SUV, then at the envelope, then back at Adrian, and suddenly there was only one thing I wanted to do. I pulled out my phone. My fingers were still shaking as I searched for Luis's contact. When he answered, he sounded exhausted. Hey! Just hearing his voice nearly broke me again. Vanessa! I couldn't speak, not right away. Vanessa! His voice immediately filled with concern. What's wrong? I laughed and cried at the same time, which probably sounded insane. Please tell me everyone's okay. They are. Then what's happening? I looked at Adrian, then at the SUV, then at the box, then back toward the darkening sky above the parking lot. and finally managed to say the words. "Luis," my voice cracked. "Someone just changed our lives." For several seconds there was complete silence on the other end of the line. Then he said exactly what I expected. "What are you talking about?" And honestly, I had no idea how to explain it. "What are you talking about?" Luis repeated. I laughed through my tears. Honestly, if I had been in his position, I wouldn't have believed me either. "Can you come here?" There was a pause. "Vanessa, I just got home." "I know. Is everything okay?" "Yes." "Then why are you crying?" I looked at Adrian, then at the SUV, then at the box full of money, then back at Adrian, and somehow the situation still felt completely insane. "I need you to trust me." Another pause. That sentence usually means something bad. Despite everything, I laughed. For the first time in months, it felt good to laugh. "No." I wiped my eyes. "It's not bad." My voice cracked again. "It's the opposite." Luis was quiet. Then he sighed. "Where are you?" I gave him the address. "I'll be there as soon as I can." After the call ended, I sat inside the SUV while I waited. Part of me was terrified this would somehow disappear, that someone would walk over and tell me there had been a mistake, that the vehicle belonged to someone else, that the money wasn't real, that the entire thing had been some elaborate misunderstanding. But none of that happened. Everything remained exactly where it was. The SUV, the toys, the box, the letter, all of it. About 45 minutes later, I saw Luis jogging across the parking lot. The moment I saw his face, I started crying again. He looked exhausted, confused, concerned, and completely unprepared for what he was about to see. "Vanessa?" He reached me, immediately checking if I was hurt. "What's going on?" I held up the keys. Luis stared at them, then at me, then at the SUV, then back at me. "Whose car is that?" I handed him the keys. Luis looked down, then slowly pressed the unlock button. The lights flashed, the same way they had for me. I watched the realization spread across his face, slowly. Then suddenly, his eyes widened, his mouth opened, then closed again, then opened. For several seconds he couldn't speak. Finally he managed, "No." I laughed. "That's exactly what I said." "No." He pressed the button again. The lights flashed again. Luis looked around the parking lot as if hidden cameras were about to jump out from behind the bushes. Then he turned toward Adrian. "This is some kind of joke, right?" Adrian smiled. "No." Luis stared at him, then at the SUV, then at me, then at the SUV again. For the next minute he just kept shaking his head. Not because he didn't understand, because he couldn't. Eventually, I showed him the letter. I showed him the money. I told him everything, every detail, the grocery store, the food, the bus stop, the conversation, the keys. By the time I finished, Luis's eyes were red. He quickly looked away, pretending he wasn't emotional. I let him pretend. We've been married long enough that I know when he's trying not to cry. A few minutes later, he cleared his throat. "We need to pick up the kids." The drive to daycare felt surreal. I wasn't driving, Luis wasn't driving. We were both just sitting there in stunned silence, occasionally looking around the interior of the SUV, as if it might suddenly disappear. Neither of us knew what to say, because there really wasn't anything to say. How do you process a miracle? How do you explain something that shouldn't happen? You don't. You just sit there and try to breathe. When we arrived, Sophia was the first one to see us. She ran toward the vehicle, then stopped, confused. "Mommy," I smiled. "Do you like it?" Her eyes grew wide. "Is this ours?" I nodded. The smile that appeared on her face nearly broke me. Then came Mateo. He walked outside carrying his backpack. Tired from school, expecting another ordinary day. The second he saw the SUV, he froze. "Dad!" His eyes bounced between us. "Whose car is that?" Luis looked at me, then smiled. "Ours." Mateo blinked. "What?" "Ours." For a few seconds he simply stared, trying to process the information. Then his face exploded into the biggest smile I'd seen in over a year. The kind of smile children only have before life teaches them to hide their emotion. That night, the four of us sat inside the apartment eating dinner. Nothing fancy, just pasta. But somehow it tasted better than any expensive restaurant meal I'd ever had. Not because of the food, because for the first time in months, nobody was afraid. Nobody was talking about overdue bills. Nobody was arguing. Nobody was calculating expenses. Nobody was wondering what disaster would happen next. For the first time in a very long time, our family felt like a family again. A few days later, we paid the overdue rent. The eviction threat disappeared. The constant knot in my stomach finally began to loosen. Life didn't suddenly become perfect. We still had responsibilities. We still had bills. We still had challenges. But we had breathing room. We had hope. And sometimes hope is worth more than money. Months passed. Then one evening, I found myself thinking about Adrian. About the stranger who had appeared on the worst day of my life. And I realized something. The greatest gift he gave us wasn't the SUV. It wasn't the money. It wasn't even the security. It was the reminder that kindness still exists, that people still care, that the world isn't as cold as it sometimes feels. And maybe that's why I'm telling this story today. Because somewhere out there, someone is struggling. Someone is scared. Someone is wondering if things will ever get better. I can't promise that a stranger will hand you the keys to a new car. Life doesn't usually work that way. But I can tell you this. The day I shared part of my groceries with a hungry man, I thought I was helping him survive one more night. I never imagined he would help save my family. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness create the biggest changes. And sometimes, when life feels darkest, hope arrives from the most unexpected places. So if you ever have the chance to help someone, don't underestimate what that moment might mean, for them or for you. Because one ordinary act of kindness changed my life forever. 6 months later, life looked very different. Not perfect, but different. The constant fear was gone. The fear that had followed us everywhere. The fear that sat at our dinner table. The fear that kept us awake at night. The fear of losing everything. It was finally gone. Luis was doing well at his new job. A few months after everything happened, he was offered a better position. The pay wasn't incredible, but it was enough. Enough to stop drowning. Enough to start breathing again. For the first time in years, we were able to put a little money into savings. Not much, but something. And that felt like a victory. Mateo was back on his soccer team. The same team he almost had to quit because we couldn't afford the fees. Every Saturday morning, I watched him run across the field with a smile on his face. And every single time, I thought about how close we had come to losing all of it. Sophia was doing what 4-year-olds do best, laughing, drawing, making messes, and filling our apartment with more stuffed animals than any child could possibly need. The bear Adrian gave her still sat on her bed every night. She refused to sleep without it. As for the SUV, I still smiled every time I saw it parked outside. Not because it was expensive, because it reminded me that miracles sometimes happen when you least expect them. But there was one thing I could never stop thinking about. Adrian. Every now and then, I'd wonder where he was, how he was doing, whether he realized how much he had changed our lives. I tried finding him. I searched online. I asked around. I even returned to the grocery store several times hoping I'd see him again. I never did. It was as if he had simply appeared for one day and disappeared again. And maybe that was the point. Maybe some people enter your life just long enough to change it. Then one rainy afternoon, something happened. I had finished work and stopped by a pharmacy on my way home. While waiting in line, I noticed an elderly woman speaking to the cashier. She looked embarrassed, nervous. Her hands trembled as she searched through her purse. Then I heard her quietly say, "I'm sorry, I thought I had enough. The cashier explained that one of her prescriptions wasn't fully covered. The woman would have to come back later. I watched her shoulders sink, the same way mine had sunk countless times over the previous year. The same look, the same exhaustion, the same helplessness. For a moment, she simply stood there staring at the counter. Then she slowly began putting the medication aside, choosing which prescriptions she could afford and which ones she couldn't. My chest tightened because I knew that feeling, the feeling of choosing between necessities, the feeling of not having enough, the feeling that life was forcing impossible decisions on you. I thought about walking away. After all, I didn't know her. I had my own responsibilities, my own expenses, my own life. Then I remembered a grocery store, a loaf of bread, a bus stop, a stranger, and a choice. Before I could overthink it, I stepped forward. "Excuse me." The woman turned toward me, confused. I smiled, then handed my card to the cashier. "I'll cover the rest." Immediately, the woman's eyes widened. "Oh no," she said. "You don't have to do that." The words sounded familiar. I'd heard them before, almost exactly 6 months earlier. I smiled again. "I know." Tears filled her eyes, and suddenly I understood something. For the first time, I wasn't the person receiving help. I was the person giving it. The circle had come around. The kindness hadn't ended with Adrian. It had continued, and now it was my turn. A few minutes later, the woman walked out of the pharmacy carrying her medication. Before leaving, she hugged me tightly. Then she whispered something I'll never forget. "You have no idea how much this means to me." Maybe she was right, maybe I didn't, because the truth is kindness isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in moments. Moments when someone feels seen. Moments when someone feels less alone. Moments when hope returns. As I watched her disappear into the rain, I looked up at the gray sky and smiled. For the first time, I finally understood what Adrian had really given me. It wasn't the SUV. It wasn't the money. It wasn't even the chance to rebuild my life. He gave me something far more valuable. He gave me the opportunity to become the answer to someone else's prayer, just like he had once become the answer to mine. And if there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that kindness has a way of traveling farther than we ever imagine. Sometimes it changes a day, sometimes it changes a life, and sometimes it changes generations. Thank you for listening to my story.